Hello everyone, welcome to the Blipsounds YouTube channel. My name is Ryan Stunkel and today we are going to be talking about positive and negative feedback sounds in video games. Let's get started. A video game is made up of three main pieces. The art, which is what you see, the programming, which connects a player's decisions to actions made in the game, and then there are the sounds. The sounds are sort of a feedback return delivery system to help the player understand the world they are in. Let's take the Uncharted series for example. When you move Drake in the game, the sound of your foot hitting a surface lets you know what you are stepping in, the weight of your character, and even how your foot is being moved against the ground. For example, he could be dragging his feet or taking deliberate and heavy steps. The sounds immerse your player into the world to help them get a feel for the world around them with the specific actions that are taken by the player. And even further, sounds can actually be used to give the players clues as to what they should be doing in the game, by giving them a rewarding or punishing feedback sound. The concept of rewarding and punishing feedback sounds in a game is very simple and can be introduced in just the first 10 seconds of the first Mario game. You grab a mushroom and then you get a nice jingle that plays. See, right there is a rewarding feedback sound, the doodly doodly doodly, and then you get hit by an enemy in Mario and you get a punishment sound. And that sums it up really. And to recap what we just saw from Mario for the sake of this video, the reward punishment feedback system is basically giving the player a good sound for good things that happen, and a bad sound for bad things that happen. It's really not much, but it's incredibly effective. Despite it being such a simple concept, it can invoke a huge emotion in a player and can actually be imperative to making sure your player understands your game fully, which we will be showing examples of later in this video. Throughout most good games you will see variations of this reward and punishment feedback system, like jumping on an enemy in Mario, collecting an extra life in Mega Man, or hearing the low health beeping sound in Zelda. All of these are ways of eliciting an emotion from the player. The player or something in the game performs an action, and then they are rewarded or punished for it, and without the sound it doesn't quite feel the same. Imagine if you were to die in a Castlevania game and it didn't have the death sound. Or imagine if you didn't hear the jingle when you beat a Mario level. But it's interesting because it was the game developer's choice to add those sounds in the game. We probably wouldn't feel the joy of completing a level, or the heart-wrenching feeling of dying if we didn't add sounds in there. Listen to completing a Mario level without any sound. It doesn't feel so rewarding, does it? Does it? No, that's right, it doesn't! And sometimes it works in the opposite way, as in adding a sound for things you don't expect to be rewarded for can make you feel good when you usually wouldn't without the sound. For example, here in Tetris Attack they give you a greater reward sound for doing a better job in the game. Tetris Attack is a multiplayer battle Tetris type game where you try to get 3 or more blocks of the same color in a sequence and then they go away. If you get enough blocks in a row, you can force blocks onto your opponent's side. So at its smallest stage, the blocks that you force over look something like this. Which, you know, isn't a lot, but if you're good enough at the game, you get a lovely jingle that plays. Hear how satisfying that is? Look at how big that block is. But there's more. If you do even better, then you get an even better jingle. It's a little difficult to really show how good this feels in a video because the true experience of the emotions that are felt are meant for people who are truly immersed in a game, which is done by, you know, playing it. Throughout the history of video games, there have pretty much always been rewarding and punishing feedback sounds. It caters to the very nature of what a game is. The player takes on challenges and is rewarded or punished based on their performance. These feedback sounds are present pretty much everywhere and can be at any time. You're probably thinking, okay, yeah, Ryan, we get it. Use good sounds when good things happen and bad sounds when bad things happen. But that's not always true, and there's a lot more depth to it. It all depends on how they are used. You can't just be throwing these feedback sounds wherever you feel like it. There's an art to it, and it can be done poorly. And oftentimes, rewarding and punishing sounds can get mixed up. There's even an example in Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. In the first dungeon of the Dark World, you fight these small turtle enemies, and when you hit them with the sword, it makes a tink sound. This moment teaches us that the tink sound means that we are not hitting the enemy with the current way we attack. So anytime we hear this tink sound, we now know that we need to attack in a different way. Now let's fast forward later to the boss of the dungeon. You start with the sword and you hear the tink sound that we heard earlier. So the game is telling us by using negative feedback that the sword will not work. So we try the hammer, and we still get the tink sound. And then we try all the different weapons in our inventory, but still nothing works. And then 9-year-old me gets stuck, keeps trying to beat the boss over and over again, but makes no progress against it because it keeps receiving negative feedback with the tink sound. What are we supposed to do against this boss? So the correct weapon was the hammer. The game does notify you that the hammer works by the piece of its mask being broken off, but the tink sound is still misleading. This is obviously an exaggerated instance of how the player may react, but I still remember being stuck at this for a while when I was younger before a friend showed me how to do it. I realized that Link to the Past had limitations because of the system it was on, but I still feel they could have done a better job making it more clear and consistent. The point of the punishment and reward feedback system in games is to help guide the player with positive and negative motivation. But if that's broken, then the player can get lost. And that sucks. Let's move on to our next example of these feedback sounds, which is on Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo. I could go on for hours about this game, and probably will do a video for it in the future, but if you haven't played it, the gist of this game is that you play as Yoshi carrying Baby Mario on your back, trying to bring Baby Mario back to his parents because he was dropped by a stork, or Big Bird, or something. As you can see, the game is nothing but feel-good vibes with its cheerful art and happy music. So you're probably wondering where the feedback sound is. With all this happy stuff going on, it must be a rewarding sound, right? Well, you see, when you get hit by an enemy in this game, Baby Mario falls off Yoshi's back and starts to cry. And he keeps crying until you get him. And if you don't get him in quick enough time, he gets taken away and you have to restart at the last checkpoint. This sound is excruciating, and there are some difficult levels where you mess up often and have to listen to his crying constantly. The pressure to grab him just builds more and more as Mario cries and eats away at your mind while you try to get him to safety. But despite all these complaints, I think this sound and game design choice is absolutely genius. Nobody wants to hear a baby cry. You should want to get Baby Mario to stop crying by getting him. Or, you know, you could just let him get taken away so you don't have to listen to him crying anymore. Problem solved. The sound builds tension and creates a sense of urgency, which is exactly what the game wants. If Baby Mario was in a bubble just picking his nose, I don't think we'd really feel the need to tend to him. The punishing feedback sound is necessary to let the player know that it's essential to the progression of the game that he gets Mario back, and the game does it brilliantly. So what makes up the rewarding and punishment feedback sounds? Clearly there are a million ways that these sounds can be used in a game, so is there a clear-cut way that they can be created and used? Well, the short answer is no. There are just too many factors to give a clear-cut formula to use for your games. All of these examples that I've been giving are entirely different scenarios and it can't really be pinpointed down to one specific thing. A perfect example of a unique feedback sound in a game is the King's Quest series made by Sierra. King's Quest is a point-and-click adventure game where in each game of the series, you play as a different member of the royal family of Daventry. Throughout the game, you collect items and interact with characters to help you finish your quest. When you make progress with an action in the game, you get a da-ding sound, which is obviously the rewarding sound. But what is the punishing sound? Well, there actually is none. There are many instances in the game where you can make the wrong action in the game and it won't give any feedback sounds, and you won't even notice that it was a necessary part of the game. For example, I just gave this guy a piece of candy when I was supposed to do something else entirely, and it gave me no negative feedback sounds. I would have kept playing the game with no knowledge of my mistake, and then I'd be punished later in the game randomly without even knowing it. Why King's Quest? Why? There are tons of examples like this in the King's Quest series where you have to perform a certain action at the right time, but you would never know if you were supposed to do it until the game punishes you, potentially hours later. And then you would have to backtrack through a bunch of save games until you figure out what you did wrong, all because they don't give you a punishing feedback sound. So is this good or bad sound design? It's hard to say. This is where the scenario really depends on the game itself. In the King's Quest case, the time when the game was made. The King's Quest games were released in the late 80s and early 90s, so most people who played these games didn't have anything else to play. Making your player go back to figure out what went wrong wasn't a big deal because the player didn't have as many other options for games to play. Today, gamers can have a game library going into the hundreds of games to choose from. Games are just far more available than they used to be. Today, if someone had to go back through the game to figure out a mistake they made, they would most likely just play something less time-consuming. Also, King's Quest games are generally difficult. Them not giving a punishing feedback sound effect ties perfectly into the game's playstyle. There's certainly an expectation for it to be difficult. It's like if a new Dark Souls game came out and it was super easy. That would just be weird because Dark Souls games are expected by the players to be hard, and gamers would probably be disappointed if it wasn't difficult. And much like Dark Souls, King's Quest had a preconceived idea from the players for it to be difficult, and King's Quest catered the sound design to its difficulty. The reason I brought this example up is to show that you need to make your game to fit your vision, no matter if it's sounds, art, music, gameplay. All of these games that I've shown have had entirely unique ways of implementing their feedback sounds. Tetris Attack wanted to reward the player for playing well by giving them a lovely sound, and gave them an even more lovely sound when you played even better. Yoshi's Island wanted to punish the player and build tension in the game when you get hit by an enemy. It was really genius how they were able to contrast the happy and carefree feel of the game with Baby Mario's cries, And then you have examples like King's Quest, which don't even bother with a punishment sound. And ultimately, that design choice fit really well into their game. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of depth to what you can do in your game. You can use punishing sounds where you should be using rewarding sound if it elicits the emotion you want from your player. And that's what your game ultimately needs in the end. The sounds can make your player feel something that isn't actually there, and it can also help your player feel a stronger connection by reinforcing the emotion even further. Hey guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to check out this video. This is the first of many videos that I have planned for Blipsounds, so feel free to subscribe for more. If you're in need of sound effects for your games or videos, you can go to blipsounds.com in the description below to buy some sound effects that we created. Or you could fill out the contact form on our website if you want custom sounds for your game. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys.